A 2013 study found a farming method that produces 13 times more food than conventional agriculture on the same land. 7 harvests per year, no irrigation infrastructure, no chemical fertilizers, no tractors. This system fed over 200,000 people in one of the largest cities on Earth. Today, building it would violate environmental regulations in most Western countries. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why the most productive farming system ever devised has been buried by history and how you can still build one. Welcome back to Garden Explained with Harry. Before anything else, please hit the subscribe button. Now, let us begin. The year is 1519. Spanish conquistadors march through the Valley of Mexico. They have seen empires fall. They have witnessed cities burn across the Caribbean. Nothing has prepared them for what rises from the lake ahead. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, a soldier in that expedition, would later write that his companions scarcely knew what to think. They wondered whether all that they beheld was real. Before them stood Tenochtitlan, a city of 200,000 people built entirely on water, larger than Paris, larger than London, one of the biggest cities in the entire world at that moment in history. The Spanish had conquered civilizations before, but they had never seen anything like this. Massive stone temples rose from islands, connected by causeways stretching across the lake. Canoes by the thousands moved through a network of canals, and surrounding everything, stretching to the horizon, were rectangular garden plots floating on the water surface. Endless green platforms covered in crops. The Aztecs had solved an impossible problem. The Valley of Mexico offered almost no farmland. Mountains surrounded the basin. Lakes filled the center. Boggy wetlands made conventional agriculture nearly impossible. Any other civilization would have starved or moved elsewhere. Instead, the Aztecs built their farmland from scratch. They created artificial islands called Chinampas. These islands would become the most productive agricultural system humans have ever developed. The construction process reveals engineering genius that modern agronomists are only now beginning to fully appreciate. Workers first waded into the shallow lake bed. They drove wooden stakes into the mud in long rectangular patterns. The plots measured roughly 90 meters long and between 5 and 10 meters wide. These stakes formed the skeleton of each island. Next came the weaving. Workers interlaced reeds and branches between the stakes, creating underwater fences that defined each garden boundary. This wattle framework served as the foundation for everything that followed. Then the layering began. Workers piled alternating layers of lake sediment, decaying vegetation, and mud onto the wattle base. Each layer added height. Each layer added fertility. The platforms rose until they sat just above the waterline. The surface stayed perpetually moist but never flooded. At each corner, farmers planted ahuejote trees. These Mexican willows sent roots deep into the lake bed, anchoring the islands permanently. Over time, the roots spread beneath the water, knitting multiple islands into a stable network that could withstand storms and floods. But the real magic happened beneath the surface. Canal water rose through the soil by capillary action. Plant roots never experienced drought, and they never experienced overwatering. The moisture level stayed perfectly balanced without any human intervention. No irrigation channels, no pumps, no wells. The lake itself watered the crops continuously. The fertility system was equally revolutionary. Tenochtitlan had no sewers. The city nonetheless sparkled with cleanliness. 1,000 workers swept the streets every day, washing dust into the lake. But they never disposed of human waste or food scraps that way. Instead, canoes collected organic matter from the city and transported it to the Chinampas. Night soil and food waste decomposed into the garden beds. Nutrient cycles closed completely. Nothing left the system. Everything returned to grow more food. The city fed the farms fed the city. The loop continued indefinitely. Aquatic life flourished in the canals between islands. Fish, aquatic insects, and the famous axolotl salamanders teemed in the water. Farmers harvested protein from the waterways while their crops grew on the platforms above. Multiple food sources came from a single integrated system. The results defied everything modern agriculture assumes about productivity limits. Complex crop rotations allowed up to 7 harvests per year from the same plot. They grew maize, beans, squash, tomatoes, chili peppers, amaranth, and flowers for the massive temple ceremonies. The variety matched or exceeded what modern polyculture farms achieve with synthetic inputs. One contemporary Chinampa farmer near Xochimilco still works 7,000 square meters of these ancient plots. His daily harvest reaches 100 kilograms of broccoli alone. Alongside that come fresh herbs, spinach, chard, radishes, corn, and kale. This is all from land his ancestors built 500 years ago. This is what the Spanish found in 1519, the most sophisticated urban food system on the planet. A city cleaner than any European capital, agriculture more productive than anything the Old World had developed. The Spanish had not come to learn. They wanted gold. 2 years later, Hernan Cortes laid siege to Tenochtitlan. His soldiers cut the aqueducts, bringing fresh water to the city. Smallpox swept through the population, killing nearly half within months. The temples burned. The libraries that held centuries of accumulated knowledge turned to ash. On the ruins, the Spanish built Mexico City. The new rulers had no interest in maintaining Chinampa agriculture. They filled canals with rubble. They drained sections of the lake to create conventional dry land. Within decades, the waterways that once sparkled began to reek with garbage and sewage. The closed-loop system collapsed into linear waste disposal. But Chinampas are stubborn. They do not disappear easily. Some farmers kept working the old plots through centuries of colonial rule, through Mexican independence, through revolution, through urbanization. By the middle of the 20th century, satellite images still showed extensive Chinampa networks in the southern districts of Mexico City. The Xochimilco region maintained thousands of hectares of these floating gardens. Then came the population explosion. Mexico City grew from 3 million people in 1950 to over 20 million by 2000. The sprawl consumed everything. The aquifer beneath the city dropped as wells pumped water for the new residents. Lake levels fell. Contamination spread through the remaining canals. The Chinampa area under cultivation in Xochimilco decreased by more than 60% during the second half of the 20th century. Today, only 20% of the 2,200 remaining hectares see any use at all, and only about 2.5% are being actively cultivated for food production. The rest grows ornamental flowers or serves as backdrop for tourist boats. But here is where the story takes its strangest turn. You cannot legally rebuild this system in most Western countries. In the United States, Section 404 of the Clean Water Act establishes federal jurisdiction over wetlands, lakes, ponds, and waterways. Any discharge of fill material into these waters requires permits from the Army Corps of Engineers. Building artificial islands in a wetland or lake triggers environmental review. In many cases, the permits are simply denied. The regulations make no distinction between industrial wetland destruction and regenerative food production. Dumping toxic waste into a marsh and building a self-sustaining garden that sequesters carbon receive identical treatment under the law. Both require the same permits and both face the same barriers. A farming system that filters water, captures greenhouse gases, and produces 13 times more food than conventional agriculture gets classified alongside strip mining and industrial discharge. The paperwork alone can take years. The legal costs can reach tens of thousands of dollars. For a backyard-scale project, compliance becomes effectively impossible. This is why the title says illegal, not because police will arrest you for growing tomatoes on a floating platform. Rather, the regulatory framework makes legitimate implementation prohibitively difficult. The system that sustained 200,000 people in a clean, waste-free city cannot be rebuilt at scale under current Western law. The irony cuts deeper when you examine what modern science has confirmed about Chinampas. In 2019, researchers published findings in the journal HortTechnology, calling Chinampas one of the most intensive and most prolific production systems ever developed. The study emphasized not just productivity, but sustainability. These plots have been farmed continuously for over 500 years without soil depletion, no synthetic fertilizer required, no pesticide resistance developed, no aquifer drawdown. The researchers found that Chinampas provide a series of desirable ecosystem services beyond food production. water filtration, regulation of water levels during floods and droughts, microclimate cooling for nearby urban areas, increased biodiversity in both aquatic and terrestrial species, carbon capture and long-term storage in the accumulated organic sediments. The lead researcher stated directly that wherever you have freshwater lakes near a big city, Chinampa-like systems are conceivable. This applies to many parts of the world facing the same challenges the Aztecs faced 700 years ago: rapidly growing populations, shrinking arable land, water scarcity, food insecurity. He argued that while most strategists emphasize high-tech solutions such as complex vertical farms, it is worthwhile to learn from the achievements of our ancestors. A system that requires no electricity, no pumps, no synthetic inputs, and no annual replanting deserves attention. The United Nations agreed. In 2018, Chinampas received designation as a globally important agricultural heritage system from the Food and Agriculture Organization. The entire Xochimilco network holds UNESCO World Heritage status. International bodies recognize what local regulations inadvertently prohibit. So what can you actually do with this knowledge? The principles adapt to smaller scales. If you have boggy or waterlogged land that frustrates conventional gardening, Chinampa logic offers an alternative. Instead of fighting the water, work with it. You can create raised beds surrounded by permanent, water-filled ditches. The beds are built from layers of organic matter, with branches at the bottom, leaves and straw in the middle, and compost and soil on top. The surrounding water keeps the beds moist through capillary action, so you do not need to install irrigation. Willows and other water-loving trees planted at intervals send roots into the wet zones, stabilizing the structure and providing additional biomass for future bed building. The ditches themselves can support fish, frogs, and beneficial insects that help control pests on the crops above. For floating platforms in existing ponds, bamboo poles tied in crisscross patterns create buoyant bases. Seal the bamboo ends to prevent water infiltration and layer a growing medium on top. Aquatic plants root through the platform into the water below, while terrestrial crops grow on the surface. These systems work in USDA zones 4 to 10. They tolerate neglect once established, and they improve over time as organic matter accumulates. One season of construction creates infrastructure that lasts decades with minimal maintenance. The farmers who still work the original Chinampas near Xochimilco say they take pride in continuing the tradition of their ancestors. Some of those plots have been in continuous cultivation since before Columbus reached the Caribbean. 500 years of harvests from the same artificial islands. No new land required, no inputs purchased, just accumulated knowledge passed between generations. You know now what the Spanish destroyed. You know what modern regulations inadvertently prohibit. You know what science has validated. You know that the most productive agricultural system ever documented remains largely unknown to Western gardeners, while food prices rise and water tables fall. The knowledge exists. The Chinampas still float in Xochimilco, waiting for people to remember what they represent. Subscribe and watch the next video to discover more forgotten systems hidden beneath history.